The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good afternoon or morning for a couple more minutes, I guess. We'll get started in just a couple minutes, right at 12 o'clock. And just looking online just to make sure everybody is aware. This is the same information as Monday's webinar. So if you attended Monday's webinar for LEA users, it's going to be the same information. We're going to go through the LEA and charter level questions. If you attended the school users one, that it is going to be a little bit different information from that one. So just making sure that everybody is on the same page. It will be the same information as the Monday afternoon webinar. And again, we'll get started in just a few minutes. Give everybody time to get logged on and get online. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like we've got most of the folks who had registered online. A couple of folks who I had seen registered also registered for Monday's webinar, so maybe they aren't going to join us, but I may stop a couple times and just give out the bit.ly for the webinar or for the presentation. But my name is Nathan Craver. I work for the Department of Public Instruction for the Digital Teaching and Learning Division. I am the Data Assessment and Continuous Improvement Consultant for the state of North Carolina. So one of the things that I manage is the Digital Learning and Media Inventory, which is why we're all here today to talk about that. So this webinar is intended for folks who are new to the DLMI system. If you've been in it for a few years, some of this may be repeat information, but this is intended for folks who are potentially filling it out for the first time. But if you're interested in hearing that information, feel free to stay on the line and stay on with us. But again, this presentation, we're going to spend a lot of time in the webinar actually in the tool itself instead of in the presentation. So there aren't a lot of slides in the presentation, but we'll go ahead and get started. If once you get live or into the presentation, all of these links will be available for you beyond today. So and this presentation and webinar will also be available on our wiki space, which I'll give you the link for on the next slide. So if you have any questions today during the webinar, please just put those in the questions feature in your control panel there, and I will answer those as we go through as best I can. And if I miss any questions as we go through, I'll address them at the end of the webinar. Hopefully we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes left for questions if we don't get to them throughout the webinar itself. So again, for those that just came online, we're on this webinar, or excuse me, on this presentation at this bit.ly. It is case sensitive, so make sure you're capitalizing those letters, you new users, DLMI 2018. And we'll get started on the slideshow. So when you're working with the DLMI, there's really four areas of things that you need to be familiar with. The data collection system, the survey itself, where you're going to go to input data, is the first link there. That's the actual collection instrument where we collect the data from each school system and charter school across the state of North Carolina. So that's where you will log in at. The DLMI reporting tool, just to make everybody aware that all the data collected in the digital learning and media inventory is considered public information. So, if I was a parent or a newspaper or someone of that nature in the community, I could reach out to your school and ask for you to share all of the data that's collected in the DLMI. So I could call up and say, how many computers do you have? Or, is your media coordinator on a fixed or flex schedule? Or how many book titles do you have in the media center? That's all considered public information. And so we have a reporting tool. It's there for several reasons, one of which is for folks to go and look at different information, but also if you do get a public records request, which I haven't heard of many that do, but if you did, you could just direct folks to that link and it would have the information for your school system as well. The next component on there is the user's guide, and we're going to spend a little time looking at that a little bit later, but that's basically just a step-by-step guide on while filling out the rubric or filling out the survey. You can use that. It has common asked questions and guide information for when you're filling out the DLMI. And then the last link there is the DLMI wiki, which you can go to, has lots of resources. All the archived webinars like this one will be posted on there. Different video tutorials and things like that are located on there as well. So any of the resources that we've mentioned so far, or potentially you might be interested in looking at, you could find those on the wiki. So just to give you guys a background on what the digital learning and media inventory is, back in 2015, we changed the name from the annual media and technology report to the digital learning and media inventory. We did the change mainly because we aligned the new instrument to the digital learning progress rubric. So we wanted to tie in the name with digital learning. Also, we know how important it is to include the word media in terms of the media centers and their roles in the role that they play in this collection. So we wanted to make sure that alignment happened. If you're new to the instrument, new to the collection system, it used to be over 500 questions. We've narrowed it down to right around 100 questions between LEA and school. Some of those are multiple answer questions, but we updated the system. We added a whole lot of new features. Those that had filled it out previously to those that are currently filling it out have said this new system has drastically improved the time it takes to fill it out, and just a lot of the process is a whole lot easier. It's a lot nicer feel. So we've gotten really good feedback from that update in 2015. We do process updates every year. If questions don't make sense anymore, we might remove them or change the wording. So it is something that is constantly in motion. Maybe one day we'll get to a point where we get it pretty close. I feel like we're pretty close this year to where we were last year. So just a few minor changes, but we do collect this data, and then the idea was to turn it around. Part of the reason why we have the reporting tool is to turn that data around back to the LEAs and charters to help you all inform your local planning and budget decisions. So, if I'm trying to decide what device to go with in a one-to-one setting, I could potentially log into that or look at that reporting tool and look and see that most of the states go on with Chromebooks. Or maybe I'm trying to decide if I should consider moving my media coordinators to a flex schedule versus fixed schedule. I can look around and I can go in and see what schools have fixed versus flexed, and follow up with those schools to get that information. It also collects data for the school report card. This does fill out several sections of the school report card. I misspoke in Monday's webinar and said it was 5 questions. I had forgotten that we updated the new school report card with the new superintendent on board, and now have 7 questions that are on the rubric, or excuse me, on the school report card. And we can look at those in just a minute. But so that does fill out those. We also use the data instruments for filling out the state board goals, and then also a lot of times we do get asked questions from legislators and from state policymakers about things that are in the DLMI and how they can support funding. So this data is used, and it is used frequently. I do provide reports probably once a week to folks who are asking specific questions about, with the direction the state's headed in different areas. So the data, the accuracy of the data is very important to us. So we want to make sure that if you have any questions or things, concerns like that, that we get those addressed as fast as we can, and here to support you guys in filling it out. So we'll go ahead and click on this link and take us out to the wiki, just to kind of show you how this is organized. As you guys know, Wikispaces is going away, so we are working on transitioning this data over to a new platform, and when that's ready to be rolled out, we'll let you guys know what the new location is. But through the remainder of this year and next year, I believe we still have access to this website. So be on the lookout for updates on how that will change. But for now, this is where our information is stored. You'll notice these 6 tabs up here across the top that you can click on and go through each of these to see what all we have. But the one that is very important that I want to go through for you all is this requesting access. If you have users in your district who are new to the system, they have to have an NCID, and NCIDs are provided by the local education agency or the charter school. I don't control those at the state level either. So if you do not have an NCID or you're having any issues with your NCID, you can click on these 2 links. Will take you to the person who's supposed to be responsible for that at your school. A lot of times we find that this information didn't get updated when somebody retired or somebody moved to a different district or that type of thing. So there are phone numbers at the top for folks who are at the state level who can help you with that if your person's not around anymore. But once you have your NCID, then you just follow the rest of these directions. You go to the DLMI, you're going to request an account using one of these roles. If you are an LEA user or a charter user, you should request LEA admin. That's the ability that gives you the ability to edit data at the LEA and school level. And if you're a charter school administrator, then you want to pick charter school administrator, because that gives you the ability to answer all the sections that you need to answer. School administrator and school principals, those are intended for users that are in traditional LEAs that are at the school level, so they can only see their school within the LEA. An LEA administrator has the ability to see all of the schools within their LEA. We do know that occasionally we have media coordinators and ITFs that are split between schools. So they have 2 options for how they can get multiple school access. They can have 2 NCIDs, or you could give them LEA admin access, and then they just edit the schools that they need access for. Either of those work fine for us. It's your comfort level with giving them LEA access, or if you prefer them to just have 2 schools, that's up to the district, and we can accommodate either one. But the other 2 roles that you'll see on here are inquiry roles. Those are folks who just have access to look at the data. For DLMI purposes, we don't often see folks who want that. Now that this system also manages the digital learning progress rubric, we may see more inquiry-based accounts coming in. But for folks that are LEA administrators and charter school administrators, you have access to the DLMI and the digital learning progress rubric site as well, which we hosted some webinars on that earlier in the month. The next tab that you'll see is tutorials. I'm not going to go through this a ton, but just so you know, any webinars that we've done previously, or if you want to come back and access this one, I will be adding these webinars and yesterday's. I had a little technical difficulty with the conversion of yesterday, so I'm redoing it today. But as we go through any webinar that we've done or any video that we've done, we put on the tutorials here for you. Resources, we mentioned the user's guide earlier, links to the reporting tool. If you want to see each of the, just to kind of give you what's on here, the user's guide, I will click on. The user's guide, we talked about it earlier. You can come in and click on that, and it takes you to a screenshot of the DLMI with some information about what's being asked on that, some additional direction, that kind of thing, things that come back in as specific questions, just directions for places where we see common errors. So that's the user's guide. These other two links I'm not going to open, but you do have access to the code book, which is just basically a spreadsheet version of all of the questions in the rubric, or I keep saying rubric because the rubric's on my mind this morning, but on the DLMI, you can download that. It's a forced copy of a Google Doc. It gives you the option just to basically see a spreadsheet of all of the columns that would be in the report. And then the full question list are all of the questions in the DLMI with the answer choices. So you can download or make copies of both of those. And then the last one's a presentation there on the changes from last year to this year. Other things that you'll see, we have frequently asked questions. I mentioned earlier that we changed the title from DLMI to AMTR. So all the previous data, if you needed to get access to that, we have that located on this old website. I will tell you that when I started managing the DLMI, I had some trouble navigating that website. So if you really are interested in your historical data, just email me and I can get it to you probably faster than you could get it by navigating that site. So it's still there if people want to access it. But if you need access to your data, just let me know and I can send you a file, which would be faster than you trying to download it from each of the different years. And then the last link just takes you out to the reporting tool. So the next thing that we were going to do is actually log into the system. So as we're going through the DLMI, if you want to click on the next slide, we're actually going to log in, and I'm just going to go kind of not item by item, but section by section, and kind of highlight some things in the DLMI just to make sure that we're all familiar with it. So when you come into this screen, you'll put your NCID and password in, and click login. A couple things to take note of here on your home screen. Once you log in, this is just the same information that is on the wiki space, but notice that your user role and account type is located here at the top. So hopefully all of you are either see LEA or charter admin. If it doesn't say that, you just let me know and I can change your role or move you around as needed. Which brings me to something I should have said earlier. If you have folks in your district who are new, they need to apply for account. But if they've just moved from like a middle school to a different middle school, you can reach out to me or one of your regional consultants and just let them know the list of all the folks who've moved in your district who should have access, and we will just move their accounts from one school to the next. So, if you can just send them, Nathan Craver should be school administrator. Last year was at, John Doe Middle School, and this year he's at Jane Doe Middle School. Then they can just make that switch without having to get new NCIDs and things like that. But you should see your username there based on that role. Then you have different access. As an LEA user, I should see LEA, school, upload, reports, and then profile. If I'm a charter school user, I should see charter, school, upload. I believe you have the upload, reports, and then charter profile. We'll go through each of these and kind of just do a high level quick view of each. I'm going to go ahead and click on LEA. Just as a FYI, the LEA and charter sections are the same. So I'm just going to look at the LEA section, but just know if you're a charter user, when you're going through this, there are specific questions within the charter that have been removed. And the reason why they've been removed is because they don't make sense to be asked at a charter school level. For example, we ask for how many technicians do you have employed by the district, and then also how many technicians are employed by a school. And so a lot of times charter schools just, they have the technician. So we ask, if anywhere that we ask a question that's an LEA and a school level question, if it doesn't make sense because of the way charters are sort of organized, we just have deleted that question from the charter school section. Everything else is the same. The reportings are the same. Everything matches up in terms of question numbers and things like that. So when I'm looking at the charter section for end user devices, and I notice that I jumped down to 2009 and I'm missing some questions there, that's just because those were only asked at the LEA, not at the charter. So when I look at this charter, I'm going to look at the LEA section. I'm going to jump down to this particular screen. Let me hit back on welcome. This is only a problem that I seem to have at the DPI level. Let me log back in. When I go from charter back to LEA, for some reason it doesn't like to reset my data. So let me get back in here. All right, so we're going to look at this section and just take a quick look and just show you a couple things. When I look over here on the left-hand side of my navigation, you'll notice all of these areas are red except for sustainability, and I'll show you why that's black in just a second. But when you have not started on your survey, or if you have an entire section that doesn't have answers, then it's going to be red. If you have sections that are black, that means there are questions in that section that are unanswered, and if it is green, then that means all of the questions in that section have been answered. And since this is our third year of doing the DLMI, one of the changes that happened with going to the DLMI is that we pushed over the data from previous years into 2017-18. So the answers that were answered in 16-17 pushed over into 17-18. So if I look at Yadkin County schools here, for example, all of their sections look green. That means they have an answer provided in each of those sections from last year. And you also may remember we did an update in December and January, so they also may have updated at that time. So when we look at the navigation, that means that they have answers. That does not mean that someone has gone in and updated it for 2017-18. We use that navigation bar as a way for you to notice or note when we've added questions. So if there are additional questions that need to be answered, then your sections turn black. So that's just something that we use as that way of an indicator. I've gotten a few emails this week asking about why is it still green from last year. Well, the green is more to indicate sections that need attention, and we assume that you all are going to update the sections as needed from the previous year to the next. Saves a lot of time not having to answer all the questions from year to year over again. If you, for example, the first question here is about strategic plans. Typically, those are only changed every 3 to 5 years. So if you haven't changed your strategic plan in the last year, instead of making you type all of that in again, we just push it in. And then if you've updated, then you need to make the change. So that's why we do that. But anyway, so I look at this questions 1001, 1002, pretty straightforward. You'll notice that we do have, I'm going to jump back down to this section. You notice on this one, 1001 is there, but 1002 is not. We do have several times within the survey where the next question is dependent upon the answer to the previous. So for example, in this one, when I click yes, you notice 1002 pops open. If I don't have a strategic plan, then we don't make you answer or read that question. So if you see questions that seem to skip numbers, that means that potentially there was a question that required a yes to see the next question, or it's also possible that we have deleted a question throughout the years. So, but to keep it aligned to previous years, we don't change the question numbers. So if you have a strategic plan that integrates digital learning, either a charter or district, you'd put yes in the link to that plan. On this page, I do want to point out that we are asking for district level personnel. Throughout the DLMI, we ask for specific questions, sometimes that are like high level questions like, do you have any central office technicians in this case? If you do have central office technicians, if anytime you're filling out personnel or things where like end user devices where we ask about school level devices as well, we are not looking for duplicate counts or totals at the district. We are looking for district level positions. So if they report to somebody at central office or they're paid for out of a central office code and they, ultimately are a central office person, we should count them here. If they're paid for out of a school budget code, or if they're, if they, and also like report to a principal, then they should be counted at the school level. If we do ask, for example, at the school level, how many technicians, do you have any full-time technicians assigned to this school? So if you have a technician that is assigned to every school and only that school, then you can count them there, but we don't want you counting them in both places. So we don't want duplicate counts. The technicians and the ITFs and the media coordinators are really scrutinized. This is one of those questions where the accuracy of this number is a really big deal. We are getting questions now about staffing at the state level from questions like, how many devices do technicians have to support? Are schools understaffed? We've been asking them to add devices. Do they have enough support to make that happen? And so those questions are coming up. So we really, really need to make sure that we're accurate in that count. And we definitely, in that regards, don't want to have double the count, because we want to make sure we have an accurate reflection of what folks are doing and how many personnel we have out there in the state. The next section is communication and collaboration. Just basic questions about email for your school and email for your staff and students. Sustainability. You notice that it is black, and in this case, the reason why it is black is because we have added a new row here. This year, we added federal funding sources. So all of these are considered state funding sources. And then we also ask, do you use any federal dollars for any of those 5 categories? Under policy, same as before, you'll notice that when I check on these, I start to get additional boxes down below. We did add a social media policy here for you as well this year. That was one that came requested from the districts. Notice also that when I'm clicking on policy, that section is a bolded color of red, and that all of my section is in caps locks. When I click down into the next section, into school networks, notice that changes to bold and my section changes to bold. That's just to kind of highlight for you what section you're in, to kind of give you your progress, to let you know where you're at. Even though the title's here on the screen, it's just there for you to notice as well. Again, same thing here. How many access points of each brand? What percentage of access points do you have? What district access points are installed? And then what district's access, how old are they? Are they less than 5 years old? And then who are your switch providers? This is one of those that we use a lot. E-rate folks ask us for this data to help write the contracts for connectivity, or write the RFPs for connectivity, to make sure that we're targeting the right companies, or not companies, but targeting the right brands, and making sure we have what the state is using included in those RFPs. End users devices, this one's going to look a little different for schools or charters than it does for districts. Charters, you don't have to do these questions at the district office level in terms of counting devices twice. When we look at these devices, again, this goes back to the same conversation as technicians. We're not looking for duplicate counts or total counts. We're looking for, if you've got a superintendent and assistant superintendent and a couple of directors, how many devices are they assigned? And then we did have several districts who are one-to-one districts who said, all of our high schools are one-to-one and we all have the same device. And instead of assigning 10 loaners to each school, we just keep 100 loaners at central office and they're not included in the school counts. Can you give us a way to indicate that at the district level? So that's why we added these questions. Whenever you see a text box, your section won't turn green until you have entered in something into this text box. So if your answer is 0, we are asking that you put in a 0 because when we report out, a 0 is very different than a not answer. We treat not answers as though they didn't participate in the survey versus zeros as a 0 answer. So whenever you see a text box like this, please make sure you're putting in numbers into those, or and it might be a text answer as well. Under technical support, simple question about how are your devices repaired. Network services, we ask about firewall and content filtering and things like that. 2014 is an important question. We see this one get answered. Of all of the questions in the survey, this one is probably one that gets answered incorrectly the most, and we spend a lot of time tracking folks down and following up with people on question 2014, just because we want to make sure that what they answered is accurate. So we keep tweaking the wording to make sure that we try to get the answer that we're looking for. But the main thing here is if you have a secondary internet service provider and besides NCREN or MCNC, then we're asking you to tell us who that is and how fast of a connection that you're getting. So if you're a charter school and you do not use MCNC at all, then you have another provider beyond MCNC. So if you're paying for internet to someone else besides using the free MCNC version, then we were asking for who that is. We know all 115 LEAs are connected, but not all the charter schools are. So, we want to know who else is being used and how much. That way we can see if there's a reason why MCNC is not meeting the needs, or if there's something else we need to consider when it comes to asking for connectivity dollars and things like that. So that's just to help those E-rate and connectivity folks make some decisions and plan. Professional learning, you'll notice under professional learning that I only have 2 sections. The first question in here asks me, do you have a plan for professional development? When I hit save changes, you'll notice that I get a 3rd section under there. So 3001 forces some other questions to pop open. If you don't have a plan for professional development, then we don't ask those questions based on that. Under professional development format, I keep forgetting to make this text change. Every time I do a webinar, I remember that I need to do it, and then as soon as I get done, I never seem to make it happen. But this should just say who are your district's primary providers of face-to-face and who are your district's primary providers of virtual, because the first checkbox is it's internally created, so that wouldn't be external. But anyway, these are just asking for you to identify where you're getting your professional development, and that helps us to determine, how can we support PD at the state level. Moving on, as we go through access to digital content, we're asking about how do you store files and how do you share content. Learning management system. Do you have a district-wide learning management system? This section is not there for charter schools because we asked this same question at the school level. And because when we look at this, you'll notice if I put yes, maybe I'm providing Canvas to my high schools, my middle schools are using Edmodo, and my elementary schools are using Google. So I might check all 3. And then we ask the schools to tell us which one they're using so we can see, the breakdown by district. So, I can see in, Union County, they're using Canvas only at the high school, whatever the answer might be. Curation and development, we're asking about the types of content that you have. You'll notice if you filled this out previously that we did add something here to this. If you check digital textbook, we do ask now about what subjects you're providing that, and then if you say I'm doing it for ELA, then we're going to ask what vendor. There's some conversation at the state level about the potential of providing a statewide digital textbook. So there's some questions here about who are we using, like what should we investigate. I mean, it's very, very early in that process, so obviously not making any promises that that's going to happen, but people are asking those questions, and so when people want to know information that could potentially affect funding, we add that question, so that that could be potentially a good thing for districts out there and charters as well. The digital literacy was a new ad in December. This is tied into some legislation that came out that the state will investigate, basically word for word what's on the screen here. So we are investigating that because it was legislatively mandated that we would. So we had to add this section to the DLMI. I'm not sure if it will continue to stay in from year to year, but it is in for this year's version. And then the last question that we ask about is multiple and varied assessments. So how do you guys give benchmark assessments at your school? And then if you check SchoolNet, we do ask what month that you provide those, and that helps us make sure on the back end that we have enough support and infrastructure in place to make sure SchoolNet is going to work. So if we see that every school in the state's doing something in November, we're going to make sure that we have the capacities to support that, and also try to avoid updates during that timeline and things like that. So theoretically, that's what this question is used for, and we do provide that data. Obviously, there'll be times when stuff happens and things don't always work, but that's the idea here, is that that's what that's for. One last thing to point out here, this is available on the LEA and charter sections. You'll notice that when you click help, for any of the sections, it just takes you right to that page of the user's guide. So like that, what I just talked about, 5002 only appears if SchoolNet's checked, in 5001, just to give you that information on each page. The next section is forecasting. This is if you're planning on doing something in 2018-19 that you're not currently being able to answer. For example, you're not one-to-one in your charter or district, but you plan to go one-to-one next year, then you would check yes. If you don't currently have a digital textbook, but you know that the plans are to purchase one in the next calendar year, you would put yes for that. That helps us determine what the need is for cooperative purchasing and what the interest would be in certain programs. So we have repeated each of these. The first 3 years, I would expect some overhauls next year, but we did add this new one about the digital textbook this year. The next section is validation, and this is where some folks are asking some questions this year. This validation page does tell you if there are things missing. It does not tell you if things have been updated. So if I'm looking to see if my technician has updated this end user devices for me, it's not going to show me that my numbers have changed from 16 to 17. It's just going to show me where I have blanks in the report. The next report does something similar for schools. So let me pull up a district here. So when I look at Yadkin County and I look at this, this is the school sections charters. You guys won't have this because you typically just have the one school that you're responsible for and one sort of school code. So you don't need to see, your 27 or in Wake County schools, 200 schools in your district. But when we look at this, this gives me do I have any sections that have blanks? And so we added new questions under end user devices in December, and we added new questions to learning environments. So where you see those partials, that's just telling you that they haven't answered the new questions yet. So like if I click on Star Mount Middle, they didn't tell me how many touchscreens they have, and the classroom touchscreen TVs hasn't been answered yet. So that just takes me to those reports to see what hasn't been answered. But the main thing that is on this page comes on June 30th, and this is when your principals start signing off. I will just tell you, as a former district person, and anybody that might be on the line who's done this before, I'm sure Jeannie will be able to agree with me that the most difficult part of the entire process for for filling out the DLMI is getting those principal names to start appearing as being signed off on June 30th. We know that the timing of this, that's when they're closing out schools. They're getting ready for the next year. So getting principals to sign off on this is something that's really important for them to do, because they need to be invested in this, because it's their school report card data, and that's going to be what follows them in the newspaper. But one of the challenges is because typically the only time principals use their NCID is for filling out the DLMI, and so NCID passwords reset every 90 days. So they probably haven't signed in since last June, and they probably have forgotten their password, and it's going to have to be reset. So one of the things that I always tried to do is around this time, I would get with the person in my district who managed NCIDs, and I would just have her go ahead and reset all of the principals' passwords. And depending on how big your district is, that may or may not be a little bit more work. So, bring them some lunch or take them out to lunch that day as a thank you for that. But that's one of the things that I always tried to do, was to go ahead and just reset it and let them know I was going to reset it. And usually that solved a lot of problems for me there. So that's the school check. And then the LEA administrator sign off. This is the person who's responsible for filling out and signing off on the data. Typically, this is the tech director, CTO, media director, whatever the title is for the person who's filling this out. My recommendation is always just going to your supervisor, superintendent, whoever that is, and saying, are you okay with me signing off on this? And then giving them the data if they are really interested in going through it. I haven't met many superintendents who want to pick through each of the data. They typically trust their folks. But I would just make sure that they do know about it, and that you're signing off on it, and that everybody's completed it and things like that. We do occasionally have folks who don't complete it on time, and when that happens, we try to give them a phone call to let them know we're going to be moving forward and making connections with supers and things like that if we can't get it filled out in time. So I always just say keep them informed is always the best bet. Charter schools, you'll notice you have the same thing here with charter administrator sign off. You can put that in. Somebody's actually already signed off for this year on this school that I've clicked on. And then for schools, I didn't mean to click on that, but schools have a principal sign off. And Ron says, I see two principals' name that sign off. Can you please check if those are recent? So my guess is the principals probably signed off, Ron, at the January update when we asked for that. As a district person, you have the authority to go in and just delete that and make them sign off on it again. Like if you wipe out their name and then hit save changes, it'll go back to blank. I can do that as well if that's what you want to do. But we do have a few folks who signed off in January. I have a way to look in the back end to see what date it was, so I can do that for you as well. Jeannie sent me an email and said she agrees with me. I'm calling her out all kinds of ways today. Anyway, I do want to show this particular screen because especially if you are a large district, this could save you some time and some headache. In the school section, if you click on school networks, this is where we ask the question about the number of wireless access points, what Wi-Fi access points are less than 5 years old, what's the WAN speed, and what kind of WAN connection do you have. Typically, your media coordinator in your school isn't going to have easy access to the number of access points that are on the ceiling, and we definitely don't want folks walking around having to do hard counts. So what I always say, or what I used to do in this, was to create a cheat sheet for questions that I knew that my folks at the school level wouldn't necessarily have answers to, and just send that data to them to fill in. And once I got to the state role, I had heard that lots of folks did it that way. So instead of making you do that 115 times where everybody's creating their own cheat sheet and things like that. We just created an upload version. And so if you download this spreadsheet, let's see if I can get it to open here. If you download this spreadsheet, it's just a pre-created spreadsheet. You can type in your school codes, what's your access points, and then it's going to give you drop downs. So you can fill out for each of those schools. If you know everybody in your school district, for example, is fiber, once you get one of them filled out, you can just drag and drop it down. And so you can fill this out in your school, save it as a CSV file, and then when it's saved as a CSV file, then you can just click upload, and it will populate those questions for everyone in your school district. Comes in really handy if you're trying to fill this out 175 schools and you're doing the data for that. You don't have to go one by one. You can just push it in for them and do that one upload and save you some time, hopefully. And then it will populate those questions. I always recommend, and I said this on the school one yesterday, communicate with your school folks so that they're not in here changing these answers after you've pushed that through. Let them know you're going to fill out the school network section so that they don't have to do that. However, if you notice a typo was made in the spreadsheet, you can come in and I can change that number on this page. So you have the ability to do either one. You know, if you've only got 4 schools in your district and it's easier to fill it out than do that process, go for it. And you can fill it out either direction, but wanted to provide that option. Okay. Ron, let me check on that. If you've got principals in there and you want to wipe their names, let me know, and I'll see if I can't make that happen for you. He said he got an error message when he was trying to do that, so let me see if I can get that fixed. So I got another question that said, updates on staff were requested in the past on the spreadsheet as updating the NCID. Is that sufficient? So your regional person should send out a spreadsheet to you, but we have one person who's out. So if you know that you've got folks that are just moving from school to school, you can send that directly to me or to your regional consultant. So if you just want to create a list that says, you know, Johnny Smith moved from East Coast Middle to West Coast Middle, then if you just put that in there, then we can move them. You know, you can send us a list via email through a spreadsheet, you know, send us a Google Doc link, however you want to do that, and we can make those moves for you on the back end. That's just for folks that are already in the system that move from one place to another. The other thing that is also possible is occasionally we get folks that move from one district to another. If they still know their old NCIDs, we can move them as well from one district to another within the system without having to recreate their NCID. Although typically most schools require a new NCID when they move from one district to another. So either way is fine with us. Last couple things I want to show you just real quickly, because for whatever reason this seems to have been missed in previous presentations. But under the reports tab, if you're an LEA user and or charter user, you should see both of these tabs. And we use the term LEA because technically charter schools are LEAs. They have a local education agency number instead of district or charter. It's just everybody's an LEA. And so that means that you have this LEA section is either your LEA or your charter school section. And so that's going to be the reports for those questions. If I want to see all of my information, I can just click download. It's going to give me a spreadsheet, and mine's going to have everybody in the state, but yours should just have one row across the top with the question numbers and then what was typed in for that. If you want to see the school questions, I can do the same thing. I can click on download, and that's going to give me the report for this year. I can look and see, again, because I'm at the state level, I get every school in the state. If you are a district level user, then you should see every school in your district. If you are a charter school, then you're going to see just your charter school's answers to these school level questions. So that gives you just a way to get the data out and into a spreadsheet where you can see all of the data all at one time. If you're not interested in seeing it that way, then you have the ability to click through each of these reports and see, just the leadership section. Or if I'm a LEA user and I want to see what all my schools put for leadership, then I can come in here and look and see, okay, these are all of my schools. Maybe I just want to see elementaries. I can filter by that. I can look at just the elementaries in the state or just the elementaries in my district and see what they've answered for the school level. A lot of folks don't realize that they can see all of their schools without having to go and print off each school's page-by-page report. So that's here for you. And then something that's new this year, we created a new report within the system, and it's called Profile, and it's available for both charters and traditional districts, and it compares you to just schools that are like you. So we just compare districts to districts and charters to charters for this particular report. But this report allows you to basically kind of see information that's sort of summarized by section for the rubric. And so a lot of times districts are updating their policies or they're looking to write new policies. And so we've given you a graphic here that says, 113 out of our 115 said yes, they have responsible use. That really should be 115 out of 115. I'm not sure why 2 said no, but we need to track them down and make sure they say yes this year. That's required for getting E-rate funding, so that should be a yes. They probably do. They just answered it incorrectly. But anyway, if you wanted to see, say I never thought about doing a 24 access to digital content policy, but I think that might be a good idea, I can click on that link in this report. And it does take a little bit of time to load because it's pinging the system and running a search each time. So it does take a few seconds to load. But what this does is it gives me all of the school systems that have that policy. And then if I wanted to go look at it, unfortunately the system won't return a hyperlink, but I can just copy and paste that into my browser and I can go look at what their policy says. And if I wanted to borrow it or reach out to Allegheny and say, how do you think, are there any lessons learned, I could do that. So we have those kinds of things available for each of the 5 categories. This ITF report, it can give me some information and I can look and say, oh, okay, this district is not quite at the state average for school library media coordinators, and I'm not quite there for ITFs, but I'm not too far behind. So maybe that's okay. Then I can look. One report that I have seen, a question has been asked on the listserv that comes out multiple times a year, is things like, who's using Windows laptops for one-to-one programs? Who sends them home? So instead of having to send that out on the listserv and get maybe 10 people that will respond that day, we've provided that question in here. So this personal device report shows that in this district, they have Chromebooks that are issued individual students and they're sent home. And then I can come over here and look at this graph and see 80 districts are using Chromebooks for student devices, and then 66 are also sending them home. Maybe I'm considering doing iPads and I want to see the 24 districts that say they send iPads home. I can click on that button and now it's going to show me which districts individualize devices, send individual iPads to students, and then which ones also send them home. So it's just a way for me to sort of shrink down those questions that I might have so that I can look at this information, reach out to the schools that are doing exactly what I'm interested in doing, and then just sort of compare myself to what's going on around the state. For example, maybe I'm looking at professional development and maybe I'm only checking locally created and I've got all of these districts who are doing things with DPI. Maybe I need to start doing something with DPI or the Friday Institute or so on and so forth. So it's really just there to try to give you an opportunity to see what's going on, maybe to investigate some things that maybe haven't been done in your district previously. Anyway, so that's the last component of the walkthrough of the system. On the presentation that we shared at the beginning, I mentioned that you could reach out to your regional consultant for making those moves for folks that need to move within schools. These are the regions. I can do any of the regions. Just as a highlight, in the South, Julia Nichols Wilson is out. I'm not sure if we have any of her districts on the call or not, but she has been out for a little bit with some illness. So if you're in the Sand Hills, Kathy Parker is supporting that region, and if you're in the Southeast, Jill Darrow is supporting that region. But in the meantime, if you've got DLMI questions, just email me and I'll answer them, because we're kind of all supporting those regions right now. So if it's DLMI related, I definitely don't mind answering any questions and supporting that as well. Just some additional slides in here for you to look at. But if you're an LEA user, use that user's guide, work as a team to fill that out. It's vital. This data is vital to our work, so we really, it's really important that we get this data accurate. So make sure that, like, if you're not the person who does PD in your district, you're just maybe more on the technical side, and you're doing the data counts for all the hardware, but you don't know the answers to the PD stuff. Make sure you get with the person who does, and get that data correct instead of just guessing, which I'm sure all of you would do that. Would make sure you have the right information. But we do occasionally have folks who question their data. So just make sure that you're having those conversations. And I went through the rest of those bullets when we went through. So anybody have any questions in our last few minutes? I took longer than I intended. So if I need to stay on a few minutes, I can. But any questions or comments before we end the webinar? Put those in the questions feature. And I'll just go back. I think everybody who was on at the beginning is still on. But there's the bit.ly again. And it looks like folks are potentially signing off. Ron, I'm going to follow. If Ron, I think Ron's still on. I can figure out a way to get that error from not happening. And then I'll follow back up with you on that in the meantime. So any other questions that are coming in? Just again, well, I appreciate you guys for joining. This webinar will be up on the wiki as soon as I can get it converted. And if you guys have any questions, just let me know. I'm always available via email, and I will do my best to answer your calls if they come in. So anyway, hope you guys have a great rest of the week and great rest of the afternoon. Thank you for joining, and if I can help, just let me know. Thanks.